What up, guys? Today we're going to be talking about some triggers for the Glock Gen 3. I mainly run G19 and G17. I have a G45, but I'm pretty much going to only be talking about Gen 3, 17, and 19 today. That's what's dominant in California, so we're going to go ahead and talk about that. I'm going to be comparing the factory Glock trigger to Apex Tactical and Haley Strategic. I haven't really had nearly as many reps or rounds downrange with the Haley, even though I do have a good amount, as I have with the factory Glock trigger or even Terran Tactical or Apex. But before we get into that, I just want to talk a little bit about what I look for in a trigger, what I look for in any of the tools I use. Whether it's for carry or for range purposes or whatever, I think that matters. I think it matters what you're going to use your tool for, right? So I personally, I do a lot of range time. I'm a civilian, I'm not law enforcement or military, but I do train for self-defense and preparedness, readiness, things like that. So you're not going to see me competing or anything like that. You might catch me at a USPSA event, but that's because my friends are there. I try not to do that kind of stuff too often because I don't want to get any like training scars or anything like that. But other than the random events here and there, having fun at USP events or USPSA events, excuse me, with my buddies, most of my training, I mean like 90% of it's going to be trying to make myself as prepared as possible and best suited for self-defense. Okay, so with that being said, I do occasionally shoot 50 to 100 yards, C-zone steel with Glocks, but that's not really what I'm doing. Most of the time what I'm doing is anywhere between 3 yards, or I would even say like maybe even a little bit closer, all the way out to about 30 yards. That's most of what I'm dealing with in terms of range, because I feel like that's really the only time you're gonna, really the only distance that you're gonna be using your Glock for. If you're in my position, which is like self-defense and preparedness, right? I don't plan to be taking shots at 100 yards with the Glock. If you're at 100 yards taking shots with the Glock, I think there's some issues, because at that point, if it's for self-defense, you could probably just completely leave the situation if you're 50 to 100 yards away. But I'm not going to talk about every variable that could play here. I'm just going to say in most situations, for me, somebody that's into self-defense and preparedness, I'm not really looking too much towards, smoking targets at 50 to 100, even though I do it every once in a while. Okay, so with that being said, preparedness, self-defense, not competition, not long-range pistol, nothing like that. I mainly deal with what I carry, what I want to have on me every day. Trigger-wise, I'm not looking for the 1 or 2 pound race trigger, right? I'm also not really picky, so I'm gonna try and give you guys as much information in this review as I can, but I'm totally fine with stock factory Glock triggers. I will say that I've only had, out of all the Glocks I've ever shot, whether they be mine or somebody else's, one like Gen 4 trigger that I really just wasn't a fan of. Everything else, Gen 2, Gen 3, Gen 5, factory Glock triggers, I'm just fine as is. I don't have issues. Obviously, I can tell the difference between all the triggers, but that doesn't necessarily mean that, it's a make or break for me. Let's talk about the differences with some of this stuff, okay? I cleared all these, by the way, so don't worry about it. I'm not gonna do like a clear for every single one I have here. But anyway, I am running 3 different triggers currently. This one being the one that I'm using most of the time, as of late at least. This one is the new setup for me personally, the Haley Strategic skimmer trigger with the Train with Purpose Gunco trigger shoe, right? So that's what I'm running. That's what I like to carry. This is my G17, and this is running my Apex Tactical trigger with the Gunco Train with Purpose trigger shoe. Okay. This one is probably the easiest setup for me to run. I don't run this particular gun too often. This is my tried and true. This is my first Glock that I modified. This is the one that's seen all the weird random stuff. This one's had the most rounds through it. I'm kind of saying all this because I don't use this one as often anymore, but this one still probably has the most rounds and the most time. This is by far my easiest Glock to shoot. And then I have the factory trigger, the Glock setup with the factory Glock's trigger, excuse me, with the Train with Purpose Gunco trigger shoe. So obviously the factory Glock trigger is going to have the most take up, the most travel, and it's gonna weigh the most in terms of poundage, the trigger pull, right? It's completely up to you how much training you do and what you're looking for and what you plan to do with any of these triggers to decide whether or not you want a super lightweight trigger or a factory Glock trigger with the Train with Purpose trigger shoe, for example. Me personally, I can run a stock Glock trigger. I really like the trigger that I designed with the factory Glock assembly internally. It doesn't bother me whatsoever. Generally, the flat face with the angle of the flat face, it usually takes away some of the distance anyways in the pull, and I like having like that solid carrot snap. That's what I personally like. But also, I understand as we're putting together these build packages for people, I'll hang out with my friends who are my training partners, and they're all just basically circle jerking, trying everybody's trigger out, and they're like, oh man, this one feels the best, I really like this one. Doesn't really matter to me, but for the sake of giving you guys the absolute best product when you get a Train with Purpose Gunco build, and also for data collection, I went ahead and ran through other triggers. So even though I personally prefer, for reliability and self-defense, the factory Glock assembly with just my flat face trigger shoe, I do really like, again, the Apex. The Apex trigger shoe, or the Apex, excuse me, trigger assembly. I believe it was like $130 for the whole trigger assembly with the Apex Tactical trigger shoe, and I just put my trigger shoe on that. I really like that. Like I said, this G17, I fucking burn shit down with this thing. It almost feels like I'm cheating. Maybe it's not quite a staccato trigger comp setup, but it sure feels pretty fucking close for a Glock or something that's like half the price of a fucking staccato. So I'm gonna go ahead and say that if you want something light, maybe the best option here is the Apex Tactical. I've had 3 of them now on 3 different setups. This gun right here has only seen Apex Tactical ever since it's been stock. So I went from stock to Apex, and all I've ran is Apex on this thing ever since. I like it a lot. Like I said, I could get all nerdy and talk about how it's, you know, a 4-pound to 4.5-pound trigger pull, and you know, oh, it's got this much take up, this much creep, and this is what the snap feels like. I'm just gonna go ahead and say ease of use and how I feel shooting them, because there's enough nerds on the internet that are just giving you a ton of data. Okay, so as far as the lightest trigger of the bunch, the Apex I believe is the lightest. It's pretty close neck and neck with the Haley. The Haley is just a little bit heavier, but I've had no complaints with the Apex, except for the fact that after about 30,000 rounds roughly, my very first Apex Tactical trigger in this, with not my trigger shoe, but the factory trigger shoe, or not factory, but the Apex Tactical trigger shoe, the springs and the safety actually disassembled while shooting it. and so the trigger got stuck back. Again, 30,000 plus rounds. I'd say that's pretty fucking good. Most people never shoot that many rounds in their life. But it also means it's not bulletproof like a Glock factory trigger. So that's something to think about. Now the Haley, I have the least amount of rounds through the Haley with my trigger shoe. But I will say, it probably feels the most comfortable out of all the triggers. I don't think Haley Strategic planned on making a trigger assembly that was gonna be super lightweight for competition. I don't think they planned to make something that was gonna be for competition or just range time. I think what they wanted to make, considering they used all factory Glock parts, is a slight upgrade, a better overall feel with a little bit better accuracy and follow-up shots than the factory Glock trigger without losing the reliability of Glock. Considering Haley Strategic is primarily a self-defense instruction company, I'm pretty sure that's the direction they went in. So with that being said, I really like it a lot. I would suggest it to anybody with how many rounds I sent downrange so far. I'm only in the hundreds, I'm not even in the thousands yet with this. I'm gonna obviously do a follow-up after so many thousand rounds like I do with everything else. Like I said, it took about 30,000-ish rounds, a little bit over that, to break an Apex tactical trigger. And I'll see how far this one takes me. This is actually what I carry. This is my go-to carry. So I'm testing on this. This is a setup I like, and I'm trusting it with this. Like I said, if it was up to me, I'm comfortable enough with my training and my shooting abilities to where I don't really need some trigger kit. And I'll be honest with you, I make the trigger shoe that I make because that's just personally what I wanted to see in a trigger shoe. But again, I'd probably be okay with the Gen 5 factory trigger. Gen 3 factory triggers can be kind of good and bad sometimes. I've had mostly good ones. I think it more depends on your training. So if we're comparing the Haley and the Apex and the factory, I'm comparing all of them with my trigger shoe. Obviously I sell this trigger shoe, but it's not just that. I'm doing it with all the same trigger shoe because that's what I always use, so I thought that was a fair comparison to do stock internals, Haley internals, and Apex tactical internals. That's a fair comparison across the board, right? So as far as the poundage, like I said, I think the Apex tactical and the Haley are about 4 and 4.5 pounds-ish each. I think the Apex is slightly lighter, and your average factory Glock trigger, I believe, is 6 to 7 pounds. Okay. Again, my trigger shoe takes away some of the distance on there, but the poundage is about the same. So I'll drop some clips in this video along the way, if I haven't already, of me shooting all three of them, all three different setups, to see comparisons. So I don't personally see much difference in my performance on the range with the three different triggers. I think that if you train well enough, often enough, the trigger isn't going to matter as much as you would think. But for the sake of conversation, I know everybody loves to modify everything, and everybody always thinks of getting, even if it's for self-defense or competition, the edge, right? You want to get the most advantage out of any modification that you can get, and balance like reliability with performance, right? So if you're USPSA, maybe reliability doesn't matter. If you're self-defense prepped like me, maybe reliability does matter. So from distance, I would go ahead and say that the Haley probably feels the best because it's the most predictable pull. It's got the most predictable wall. All of them are all fairly short as far as the modded ones. But again, I can pretty much cover the size of my hand in terms of grouping at 30, 40 yards with both the Apex and the Haley. Recently I was shooting at 20 yards and I was able to knock out grouping of like this size with the Haley and the Apex. It's going to play a difference along the way. Obviously a factory Glock trigger is not going to be the best for shooting long range. As far as how light they are and the travel and how smooth the overall pull is, that's going to play a role in the longer distance shooting, but also on the follow-up shots. Again, my trigger shoe with the factory Glock assembly, I can rapid fire fairly comfortably at a respectable rate. And it's not a whole lot faster with the lighter triggers. It definitely is, but not a whole lot. Now, if I were to compare the feeling of the Haley Strategic, the wall, and the take up to the Apex Tactical, I would say in terms of like ARs, like if you're talking about AR-15 triggers, a mil-spec trigger would be the Glock factory trigger. The Geisley SSAE would be equivalent to like the Haley. That's kind of how that feels, where it's a little bit longer. I know we're talking about two-stage trigger with that, but it's a little bit longer and it's smoother of a pull, more predictable. And I'd say that the Apex, at least with my trigger shoe, feels kind of like the Geisley SD 3G, the flat face 3-gun Geisley trigger, where it's kind of just like short take up, right on the wall, carrot snap. Overall just short, right? So I hope that's describing these triggers well enough for you guys. Do I think that $150 to $160 for a Haley Strategic trigger upgrade, do I think it's worth it? It's up to you. If you've already done a ton of training and you're trying to find the advantages wherever you can get them, yeah, it's definitely worth the upgrade. It is more expensive than what I paid for my Apex triggers, but it's using Glock factory parts. I think that's probably why it's a little bit more expensive. As far as how easy they were to install, they were all fairly straightforward to install. Didn't take a long time. So is the upgrade worth it? If you've trained enough to where you think you need little help here, little help there, to get to that next level, perhaps. I've always liked the Apex triggers. I'm always going to say good things about them, even though I had one basically fail on me after 30,000 plus rounds. I'm not going to knock them for that, because I mean, I ran that gun really, really hard. You know, it's seen a lot. So I'm going to go ahead and say that that trigger seen its life with a lot of reliability. I mean, so Apex, Haley, both good options. Factory, also good option. Like I said, I've only seen one Gen 4 Glock trigger that I really just was not a fan of at all. But even then, what are you using it for, right? So a trigger is not going to make you an outstanding shooter. Training is. But if you are looking for triggers, my top two currently are the Haley Strategic Skimmer trigger and the Apex Tactical trigger kit.